Recording in progress indeed. Welcome back. And should you be new, welcome in the first place. I'm joined today by the wonderful Ryan Gavalier,
Thank
or
you.
as he likes to be known, Ryan Gavalier. Ryan, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. How are you doing?
Painfully average. But we're going to be talking about number one records by Big Star to kick off a series that we've had planned for about 400 years. I think we've had this plan since the album came out in 1972. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so we're going to be talking about number one record, which was the number one record of Big Star. Didn't really get to number one in the charts, but hey, them's the breaks. So what we're planning to do with this series then is really go through Big Star's entire discography and solo stuff. So we're going to look at Chris's stuff with Rock City. We're going to look at his classic solo album. We're going to look at all the weird Alex Chilton stuff, and there's a few books, and there's the documentary, there's box sets. They won't be lengthy videos, so we're not going to do everything as an hour long epic. So just 59 minutes or so. But Ryan, let's crack on with number one record. So what's your kind of intro to number one record?
So I would just say that Big Star was a band that I had heard about for a long time that I didn't get into until you had recommended them to me maybe like I don't know, maybe 2 years ago or something like that. Um, but I remember I had seen them in like ads or like stores like Target, which I know that probably doesn't mean shit to you, but like, yeah, there's a store here called Target, but like they have like records that they repress and like do reissues and stuff, and so Big Star was one that I would always see, um, but it was always like lumped in with like the Eagles and stuff, so I didn't know if they were a band that was going to be my thing because I'm not really like a huge Eagles fan. But that was like I would see people like posting in record groups like, "Oh, got this stack at Target." It's like all the Eagles and then number one record. I'm like, so I don't know, like so I didn't know, but you were like, "No, dude, you really gotta check this out," and so I did. Um, and right from the first song, Feel, I was just captivated right away by that like eerie guitar tone that do, 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 goes into the heavy guitar and then Chris Bell's screaming vocals. I was just like, holy shit, this is not what I expected. So yeah, I would just say right from there, it was an emotional experience listening to this album. It was one that took me a few listens to fully realize. And while I would say it's not 100% a perfect record, it's definitely one of the best of all time. So that's my intro. Are we just going into the review too, or
Yeah, I mean, so rather than go on and do every single track individually back and forth, so I mean, if you want to pick out maybe your favorite songs, your most interesting parts, um,
yeah,
something you don't jive with quite as much, or something that's grown on you, maybe.
yeah, sure, absolutely. So, like I said, Feel I love. Um, I mean, there's just so much dread in that song. I'm feeling like I'm dying. I'm never gonna live again. Like it's just really, really potent. You got that guitar sound, like I said. Honestly, the vocals remind me a lot of like Ozzy and Black Sabbath. Like that's how heavy this song is. It feels like kind of that, but then at the end you have weird kind of jammy stuff too. Like you have some horns or whatever saxophone. It's just a very strange, almost like Roxy music meets Black Sabbath. That's what this song kind of feels like to me. So I love that. Ballad of El Goodo, I love. 'Cause it's like anti-war message and such. It's just really powerful. Great chorus on this song. This one gives me chills every single time I listen to it. It's definitely one of my favorite Big Star tracks. In the Street, love it. Definitely a classic. It's more remembered for the Cheap Trick version from that 70s show, but this is the better version for sure. Just another fantastic Chris vocal, while El Goodo was Alex. This one's Chris. Even though Alex wrote the song, great guitar sound on here too. I think that's one of the things that I love the most about this album is Chris's guitar sound, that real like trebly but still balanced sound that just really lights up the whole orchestration. You also have like great bass playing from Andy Hummel as well throughout this album. It's just really, really potent as well. 13's beautiful, one of the most beautiful songs of all time by Alex, I would say. I mean, gives me chills. Don't Lie to Me rocks. This is definitely like turned into one of my favorites on the album. I mean, Andy just sounds insane on this one, and so does Jody on the drums as well. But just overall, it's a real rockin' track. Definitely like the most like bar room hard rock type song on the album, I would say. And Chris just sings his ass off. India's song, I it's a mix for me. Sometimes I'm okay with it, sometimes I skip it. It's a very in the middle track for me. When My Baby's Beside Me, I love. My Life Is Right, pretty good song there. It's not one of my favorites on the album. Give Me Another Chance, I think is absolutely beautiful though. I think that's the best song on side two, in my opinion, by far. And it's also one of the most like tender songs in Big Star's catalog, I feel like. Between the harmonies, like in the middle of the song, and just like that real pain that you could feel in the lyrics. Like it's definitely one of Alex's most genuine vocal performances. Just overall perfection there. That's definitely one of my favorite Big Star tracks of all time. But then honestly, the rest of side two, Try Again, Watch the Sunrise, and ST 100-6, like they're all listenable, but none of them are standout tracks for me. I feel like the album really does kind of end on like a weird note. And I know that they purposely wanted to separate like more of the acoustic tracks from the more rocking tracks between the sides. But I just feel like even in that, the album was sequenced, or I just think they should have had better tracks at the end. Because I feel like it's, even though they try a different style, I just don't think Try Again's a really strong song, and it's also not a really strong vocal performance by Chris. I think he has way better vocals throughout the rest of his career and on this album even. Watch the Sunrise, it's just very like late 60s folkish and like just not really my vibe, honestly. It used to be more my vibe, but as I've gotten older, I've kind of moved away from that music. And then ST 100-6, it's just it's cool as an ending, but I feel like after the last two tracks, I needed something a bit stronger to end the album. So I would say that this album is like 75, 80% perfect. Like this was a band of young people. They were like early 20s, late teens. And it's extraordinary that they made an album as good as this and as well produced as this, which also is largely in credit from the help of John Fry as well, guy who's like in charge of Ardent, and then also Chris Bell, who is only on this album in terms of Big Star for his like innovation and his production and just how much time he spent in the studio trying to perfect that sound, Well, I do think the sound is there the entire time. I do think the songs vary a little bit at times, like India's song and then the last three on the album. So if I'm gonna rate it, I'm gonna give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think that it's, even with that being said, still one of my favorite albums of all time. But like any group of young people, it's probably not going to be a perfect album. They had a lot more to learn, they had more to grow, and I think that they did reach perfection at other points of their career.
Fantastic. So yeah, I mean, I'll run through the same stuff then. So as you mentioned, it's a bit of a strange one, really. With they're all kids, but none of them are rookies. You've got Alex, who's already had a number one record as a teenager with the Box Tops, and you've had Chris, who and Jody, who yeah, they weren't as big as the Box Tops, but in Memphis they were kind of local legends with Rock City. They'd already made a big name for themselves, so
Yeah,
the local scene were already kind of icons in a strange way, especially refusing to leave the city and staying in Memphis. Um,
yeah,
but the actual tracks themselves, I like that you threw in folk coming into it because especially inside too, I think that's a part of the story that isn't considered as much is that people talk about the power pop, the birth of power pop, and they talk about a Beatles influence, but they don't really talk about that more folky side of Big Star that's in there, which certainly on. I don't know if it comes from the Beatles at all. It would be parts of Rubber Soul, but I don't think that's Beatles inspired at all. Um,
no. Well, I know when I read Chris Bell's book, um, it talked about how Alex, after he left the box tops, he really um just spent a lot of time doing singer-songwriter stuff by himself, going out with an acoustic guitar, playing like coffee shops and like venues like that, just like smaller venues and stuff to kind of get his songwriting up to snuff. Because I mean, with the box tops, he wasn't writing that stuff really. Like, I
yeah,
mean, it was more so like it wasn't really like a creative effort for him. It was just basically him singing songs. But when he left that, it was like, well, now I got to work on writing songs. So he really did take an influence from folk and stuff.
yeah, and from again, we won't go too much into what we've picked up from the books because we'll cover them at some point. But certainly, part of the initial idea with Alex and Chris as a pair was not so much Lennon and McCartney, but Simon and Garfunkel. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you can hear that in here quite a bit. So you can hear where the origins of that are. You can certainly hear Alex, the singer songwriter, in that mold, and he'd already done the Free Again, those sessions in 1970, which have been released separately. So we'll no doubt cover that at some point. So you can hear that there's already different ideas have gone into this. And then there's what they love in general. So yeah, there's a little bit of British invasion. There's a little bit of soul. There's a lot of Memphis stew, I guess, that goes into this kind of thing. The tracks themselves. So Fear, as you said, it's dense and it's dark and it's broody, but it also sounds like a party at the same time. It's a really clever trick to pull off to be able to do both of those kind of opposites at the same time to make it sound like a great party in hell. Um, and adding the sax on gives it a more Stonesy Faces kind of vibe. Stones from this period in particular, with Bobby Keys on the sax, gives it that kind of sleazy saxophone vibe. You got El Goodo, such a great track from Alex. Sensitive and tender and idealistic, but it's powerful and it's bold at the same time. I mean, this record came out when the Vietnam War was still raging, and Nixon was still in office. So it's quite a statement to be releasing on just a pop album, if you like. Stunning vocals from Alex. To this day, every time I hear the word unbelievable, I want to pronounce it unbelievable. Unbelievable ads, brilliant. I love his strange enunciation on these tracks. And you get some great drumming from Jody in this. It's a more laid back track in general, but it's not quiet and acoustic. It's kind of boisterously, defiantly acoustic, which is quite different. In the Street, as you said, people might know from that 70s show, but hey, you can't hold that against it. I mean, it's such a great track anyway. A little bit of a major influence, I think, on Alex's vocal style, a little bit Roger McGuinney. So there's a little bit birds coming in, I think, and the guitar sounds quite a bit. But mixing it with the more garage rock sounds of the 60s, the stuff that you'd hear on the Nuggets compilations and the like. 13 is such a quintessential Alex Chilton. You know, he can do the most depraved songs, as we'll come to later in the catalogue, the most disgustingly offbeat songs, which are wonderful. But here we have the most tender and heartfelt, innocent, naive little ditty in 13, which again was in my 70s show. So at least I got a few royalties from my 70s show. A great song, so pure and innocently driven snow. And one of Big Star's most enduring songs in terms of other artists covering them, and it's been done a million times by a million. Probably because you can do it acoustically, and it sounds great as well. You don't need a full band. Don't Lie to Me, such an aggressive, pure rocker. It's really primal. Again, going back to more garage rock sounding places. And I love that they sing in harmony, Chris and Alex. But then, as the song gets angrier and angrier after the middle eight part, it comes back in, and they're not singing in harmony anymore. They're singing the same parts, but they're not in harmony. It's like the anger is kind of making them just go over the top and not pay attention to where they are in the song. Great stuff. The India song is interesting. I was actually wondering, where did I hear this? And then I realized Jody told me it himself when I interviewed him, that it's almost a pastiche. It was never intended to be too serious. It was always supposed to be a kind of, we're almost ripping the out of the idea of putting in a song like this, as so many artists had done. You know, hey, I've discovered the yogi. As our friend Mike Love might like to incorporate that kind of thing into music. So they're almost kind of parodying that in a strange way. I don't know. Maybe you could add in a few more funny lines to kind of make that clear. I think if that was the case. It's such a great side on record, but the India song does bring it down a bit. And I just think if you switch the India song and When My Baby's Beside Me, you've got one of the great side ones in music on this record.
I agree completely.
Yeah, and it would tie into the whole heavy side one, and then more thoughtful, melancholic side two. But
Yeah.
When My Baby's Beside Me is phenomenal. I mean, that just sounds like a real raver as well. I mean, to rhyme doctor and locked door, genius,
Yes.
genius stuff.
So
Don't,
good.
that's a
My
no.
baby's beside me.
Yeah,
Oh, I know.
yeah, and it's great. But Alex just sounds like he's having the time of his life. Phenomenal stuff, and it's joyous. And when you hear about the bands that were influenced by Big Star, and admit it very openly, obviously, like Teenage Fan Club, new album out this week, and the Posies, this is a track, especially where I think you can hear that really overtly. You can hear the not just influence, but you can hear their sound forming here exactly on When My Baby's Beside Me. My
Yeah.
my life is right. Like a couple of these tracks is one that Chris brought in from Rock City. It's tender as hell. It's gorgeous. But then it picks up and it's again got this kind of righteous anger to it parts. And it's not an anger of aggression. It's more just a young man's intent. It's kind of his kind of anger at the world, and then being defiant in the face of what's keeping him down. With in this case, a love interest, because the way he sings, "You give me like," and then it goes really heavy. You are my day. It really just picks up for no real musical reason. It just gives you a feel. To go back to track one, it gives you a vibe that I don't think anybody else was really doing at this point. I mean, we've done a whole series with Grant Rock Warehouse. From anyone who isn't familiar, please like and subscribe. About the Raspberries, and their songs tended to just be, if it was a happy song, the lyrics would be happy and the music would be relatively happy as well. Whereas a lot of the time on Big Star, they kind of play around with that. So the songs can be melancholy on paper, party atmosphere when you actually hear them, or vice versa. Uh,
Yeah. Well, I
sorry,
feel like I feel like Big Star was definitely going for more of an artsy approach than the Raspberries were. Like I think the Raspberries weren't trying to fool anybody. They were just doing their thing.
and they had, and they're lumped in together purely because of the power pop movement, but they were promoted very differently at the time. Although what both bands share is that they weren't promoted well enough. They didn't have the
Yeah.
distribution in the right places. The Raspberries
Like
had that little bit crossover with the hit single, which Big Star never did.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
Give Me Another Chance, gorgeous harmonies from Chris coming into this one. So when Alex is singing the main parts with the "You Feel Sad," he's singing it really high, and then Chris doubles it later on. God, their harmonies, the voices are so different, but their harmonies just work perfectly. I can see exactly why they thought, "Oh, we've got a kind of Simon and Garfunkel thing going on" when they first started singing together. And then to come into the kind of run of the album that you were not down on, but just in comparison to the rest of it, Try Again, another Rock City track, mournful, it's poignant. There's a It's looking for a bit more redemption, but I'm not sure the character is going to find it because it sounds like a desperate plea. It's got a few more of the more spiritual connotations that Chris would explore on his solo recordings, or I Am the Cosmos, if you want to look at it as the album is intended. But it really just hints at that. I mean, it does mention the Lord at some points, but it doesn't go overtly into that. So it's really just a plea to, I guess, the cosmos. It's great stuff, but you're right, it's not quite in keeping with what we've heard so far on the record. It does feel like a more singer-songwriter approach has just jumped into the album with this little stretch that ends it. And that
Yeah,
continues with Watch the Sunrise. I mean, I love the layered guitars on it. Wonderful stuff. It's got an almost Smile like by the Beach Boys refrain part in it where they're not just doing our prayer, brother, but they're just kind of making noises, and then on top of that, layering harmonica on, and it sounds terrific. It's very like someone who now says he wasn't influenced by Alex Chilton is Paul from The Replacements. He said he just liked him for a bit. But if you listen to Skyway by The Replacements from Pleased to Meet Me, it sounds exactly like this one. There's no way that he wasn't a massive Alex Chilton fan. It's on this, if nothing else, purely on this. And again, Alex on it vocally just reminds me a lot of Roger McGuinn from this kind of period. Ballad of an Easy Rider, sounding Roger McGuinn, that more folky side to him they had. And I never know how to say the last one. I should have asked Jody, but I never know it. ST 100 over 6, ST 106, ST 106. The last track of the album. I like it as a little spiritual closer. That it almost does remind me of the more Beach Boys, like way to end an album, but there's a more dark feeling to it with the love me. It's more downbeat. It's more
yeah,
indie pop as we'd come to know it decades on. But it's a kind of downbeat way to end it. It doesn't have the defiance that we find the teenage defiance pretty much from the rest of the record.
yeah. I feel like it could have been the right ending if it would have. I think if side two was a little more balanced, that could have still been the right ending.
Yeah.
I just think having that run there, it just feels so disjointed from the rest of the album. Like I feel like even if you put like Watch the Sunrise somewhere else on the album,
Mm.
and then you put Try Again some, maybe still keep that in like the same kind of place, like but have take something from side one, put it over. Like I feel like if you kind of switch songs around, it
Yeah.
would have been a lot better. I just think they went for like having this concept idea,
Mhm.
but at the end of the day, it didn't end up serving the album right, which is something that I think that people who are newer to what they're doing would do. Like, I mean, they had done some recording and stuff, but it didn't go too far, at
Yeah.
that point. It had been mostly like demos and like collections of songs.
Yeah.
But in terms of sequencing like cohesive album, I think they still had a little more work to do with that.
Yeah, and it does sound like the work of a band who are still kind of discovering, as you alluded to, who they really are. And
Yeah.
they've got 4 or 5 different ideas on what they could be. None of them are terribly in sync with the other ones, but they're all sympathetic enough that it doesn't jar. It, they do stand out, those last few tracks, but they don't jar. They don't make you go, "Oh, what's this?" It's not a sudden jolt. I like the vibe of it though. I think that there's also a separate album in those tracks that could have been a more lo-fi melancholy album in general. So it
Yeah.
feels like that's more of a remnant of the singer-songwriter stuff that they were exploring earlier on before they turned into more of a rock band with the 4 piece and with John Fry giving them more options in terms of how to go in for a much more magisterial sound and a much bigger production than they could have managed on their own.
Yeah. I feel that for sure.
I picked this up earlier this year. It's the 50th anniversary vinyl, and I don't know why I need more than 3 copies of this, but I think I've got 5 or 6. But
Mhm.
um, it's on this. I don't know how well this will show up. Yeah, it's like raspberry ripple vinyl.
Nice.
Yeah, don't know. It's like one side looks gold, and then over the side it looks more purple. But the way you hold it, like, kind of makes it change. It's so weird. Yeah, and it just makes me
That
want
is
raspberry ripple ice cream. Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah, which came from Ardent as well. So, yeah.
Oh wow.
So rather nice stuff. And then when this album, when I originally heard it, it was on the old Tufa from Reiko Disc, and it did cut out ST and it made some edits to the tracks. So I think because I've got that history of having that original Tufa, um, the album's just always, oddly enough, it never sounds like the end of the album to me because it sounds like it should now kick straight into um, Radio City. You
That
know,
makes
it
sense.
almost feels like I'm waiting on that because that's such a great, even though it's edited to fit CD length, it's such a great little compilation that, regardless. Which is why I never quite understand why there is a best of Big Star. I think there's only 3 albums in the main catalog, 2 if you want to talk about the more classic era, if you like. So, do you really need to have a best of for that? No.
I also feel like they're a hard band to have a best of.
Yeah,
I mean, like I could I could put one together for sure.
yeah,
And we could do that as an episode,
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
at some point. We could do like our own best of or something. But
That'd be fun.
yeah, like I don't know. It's a great album. I think it's definitely not perfect in my opinion. I think that nothing on the album is bad material. So in that regard, it is kind of perfect. I just think it could have used a little bit of a resequencing possibly.
Whereas I just, I guess this happens when you're so familiar with something. I don't hear it out of context, so it just sounds like number one record to me. Uh,
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to almost imagine what it would be like resequencing it. But hey, that's them's the breaks. So I mean, very briefly before we go though, this is, as you mentioned, the only time we're going to have a Big Star album with, well, it's not the only time we'll have Chris on a Big Star album, as we know, but the only time he's credited certainly of being on a Big Star album. What do you think the difference is mainly between having Chris and not having Chris as part of Big Star?
Um, I feel like you lose you lose some of the I don't want to say you lose the rock edge because obviously like on third there's some kind of rockin' songs like Kiss of Me and stuff like that, but I think the certain brand of rock that Chris brought to the band kind of like that. I mean, he was listening to like Led Zeppelin and like Sabbath and like Grand Funk Railroad and all those bands and stuff. Like he was listening to a lot of heavy music, and I think he kind of brought that to the band. Um, and then also like I think he had a very unique production style, especially with like the guitar and like even like when he lets the bass kind of come out a bit more because there's some like really bass heavy moments and stuff like I think he definitely brought a production style that was weird and it was a little unconventional. Whereas I feel like Radio City is more just one of those albums that you will see like people talk about like on a like best of all time production. So I think it is more of like a conventional production style in a lot of ways, or
Yeah,
like what more people think of like a greatly produced album.
yeah. I also think it keeps Alex more in check. This feels like the only time where Alex is part of a band and not the band leader. Um,
Yeah,
whereas when you obviously when you get into third, it's his project entirely, pretty much, and it's more of him and Jim Dickinson. But even when you go into the next record, it's Alex pretty much calling the shots. It's much more of an Alex project, or Alex led at least. Still with the guys as a very distinctive rhythm section, and we'll go into it when we come to it. But Chris does come back briefly in the background. But yeah, this is a stunning debut album, one of the classic albums of the period. It feels like it feels like it used to be a more obscure record, but it's been talked about so much more now that it's become almost an accepted classic in its own way. So
yeah,
it's gone, as you say, it's in Target. But I bet you. So next to the Eagles, imagine that in the 70s when people were complaining they couldn't even find Big Star records. They wanted to own them and just couldn't literally get a copy. So
yeah,
the idea of having, we'll go into, I think probably documentary is the best point to cover that kind of thing. But why they didn't have that kind of crossover. And, was it this distribution? Was it their own tendencies? Was it their own making? Was it the fact that they wouldn't move to LA? We can go into all that kind of thing. But after 50 years, this album just stands up as what it is, and it's such a vibrant and unique statement from a debut record, quite unlike him.
yeah. No, it's there isn't any album that's like number one record.
Yeah,
I mean, for all of its perfections and all of its flaws, it's its own album and it's like it is magical. Like even when it's not perfect, it's still magical and like I don't know, I could listen to it over and over again and just accept it for what it is because it's a classic.
yeah. It's easy listening without being easy listening. Yeah, in the best possible sense. Once it's in your system, you can stick it on and just love it every time you listen to it. It
Yeah.
still challenges you, it still pushes you, but it's easy to get into your DNA. And once it's in there, it doesn't go out again.
Yeah.
Well, next time to wrap that up for episode one of Big Star, the series that has no title because I've not had to write one down yet, but it's Big Star episode one. That'll do. So
Number one episode.
number one episodes, yeah, but then that doesn't really work for number two episodes. um, yeah, I mean, maybe I should just call it, Marvel's Star Wars Disney presents, just for the clicks.
Definitely.
But uh,
Netflix presents.
Ryan, we're going to have all your socials down there as well, and get your because people don't know if they watch this channel. Ryan's been on talking about his own musical project recently, recently as in this year, but EPs, album, as a producer as well. You've got plenty going on. Is there anything particularly you want to mention?
Yeah, sure. Let's see
He's
here.
left us, folks. That was rude of him, wasn't it? Oh, there he is.
So we got Shadow Plays Behavioral Future Marketplace. Um I did the instruments on here, the mixing, the production, um, mastering, etc. My friend Kai wrote this lyrics and did the vocals and such. It was kind of his vision, and then I produced it basically. But that's a really cool one. You can get it on Bandcamp. You can hear it on all major streaming. Rand Anthony Kelly has his album No Easy Access. You can get that on Bandcamp as well. CDs are about to go up on there in the next couple of days once they get mailed in to me. But the digital download is available for pre-order, and then it'll be on all major streaming on the 26th. October 13th, my first full-length solo album, Ryan Gavalier's Night of the Living Dead, will be out. Um, Basically a soundtrack album inspired by George Romero's classic. And there's tons of other stuff going on, but you can check me out at gavalierproductions.org. Um, that's my website. You can find pretty much all the information you need there. And yeah, please check it out. Let me know what you think. And if you are looking to release some music too, I'm also looking for new artists as well.
Magic stuff. So, as I say, we'll get that linked below. We'll keep that in the description for each episode as well. So there we go, folks. So we won't be doing this as a weekly show or anything like that because Ryan and I both know about the perils of signing up for far too much content and then having to actually produce it.
Yep.
So yeah, but we'll be back probably in a month's time or so. So subscribe if you like. I don't like pushing these things. If you don't like it, don't subscribe because it's just going to be more of this kind of stuff. So you won't enjoy it if you didn't like this. But if you didn't like this, to be fair, why are you still watching?
Yeah.
Folks, thank you very much. Ryan, always a pleasure, never a chore.
Thank you.
I'm going to hit the stop bit now, folks. So this is the end of the video, but we're going to talk anyway. But you're now.
Love.
That's an old reference.
I
Um,
know.
Folks, thank you very much. And let us know what you think of Number One Record below, or indeed about the video. Complaints, comments, suggestions, general harassment. All good. We'll see you next time.